So my name is Beth Hamaty, and I am a master gardener. I mentioned earlier that I taught school. I taught a history class for 32 years at Abilene High. I didn't kill anyone, and they didn't kill me, so I call it a successful career. I really enjoy high school kids, and a lot of people are like, what? I'm like, yeah, really, I do. Most of the time, occasionally, not one, but most of them. So today, we're going to talk about butterfly gardening. I do have a certified butterfly garden at my house. It's certified by the National Butterfly Association. It's not really that fancy. Basically what you do is you make sure you have 3 larval plants and 3 nectar plants, and then you pay a fee. And that's how you get certified. And of course the fee helps them do their thing. So as I'm walking around, I'm going to be walking in front of the screen. Occasionally I tend to pace when I do this. So I do apologize. I'm used to kind of having a screen that's up a little higher and I don't get in the way. But hopefully this will work out okay. So now that y'all kind of know a little bit about me, we'll start out. Now in the butterfly gardening PowerPoint, almost all the pictures are mine. And I didn't do it because I'm a great photographer. I just wanted you guys to see the kinds of butterflies you can get in your garden, right here in good old Abilene, Texas. Because when I first started, I wasn't really sure what I was going to get. And so I was kind of excited about that. I got a lot of things I wasn't really expecting. So this is a picture I took. This is a sulfur, I think it's called a dog face, and it's on lavender. By the way, this is the one lavender plant that I actually grew and didn't kill immediately. Lavender's something I really love, but I don't do well with. It can be a little persnickety. And here, this was actually taken in November. I find that my best months for butterflies are October and November, if we don't have an early freeze. But you can see lots of butterflies there. Okay, so the keys to success are pretty basic. Okay, and the first thing is go native, all right? Second is host plants, next one is nectar plants, and then have a friendly environment. So why natives? Most butterflies have a very specific host plant. A lot of folks don't realize that. Butterflies and moths, their caterpillars need a very specific plant in order to survive. Sometimes it's an entire family of plants. Y'all know the monarchs and butterfly weed or milkweed. Sometimes it's even broader than that. So swallowtails, for example, anything in the carrot family, which is carrots and dill and fennel and all sorts of stuff, even wild carrots. Even things that are brought from Europe, it's fine. Anything in that family they're good with and they're pretty happy with. But they do need specific things, and natives just give that to us. Oak trees, for example, support something like 600 different kinds of butterflies and moths. Not all of them are in this part of Texas, but nationwide. A ginkgo tree, 2. So natives are going to give you more bang for your buck. Okay? And the nice side of that is the more caterpillars you have, probably the more birds you're going to have. Okay, and just let's face it, if you're going to have caterpillars, you're going to have to share some with the birds. That's just kind of the way it is, and that's okay. All right. So some imported plants can actually be harmful to native butterflies. There's a passion vine. It's called a red passion vine that comes from South America. Now they've recently developed a red passion vine that is actually a hybrid of a native, and it's okay. It seems to be pretty okay with the butterflies. But the South American passion vine actually kills our Gulf fritillaries and zebra butterflies. Zebra longwings are another one that use it. So it's important to stick with things that are pretty much native. Native plants also handle our delightfully erratic Texas climate. When we had that big old freeze, what was the year before last? I lost a rosemary. That was it. I lost a rosemary plant, which was actually on its last leg already, had already started dying out. But the reason why, I'm convinced the reason why is because I had so many natives in my yard. And so now some looked kind of bad after it was all said and done, but they all managed to bounce back. Okay, so you don't have to start from scratch and just pull everything out and put natives in, okay? Nobody wants to do that. Nobody's got time for that. So add some natives to your existing garden. If you're curious about what are native, there is actually a native plant society. You can go online and they'll give you a list. You can go to their website and then it'll ask you where you live, and then it'll give you some pretty specifics. You can also go to the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower site, and I think both of those may be in the PowerPoint towards the end. I think I have both of those in there. If not, remind me and I'll mention those again. You can also replace plants. When you replace plants, go native, because plants do eventually die. They don't all live forever. In my yard, some die more than they probably should, but that's okay. My feeling is if they can't survive me, well, they're not for my yard. So, yeah. Okay, so host plants. If you really want butterflies, you got to have host plants, okay? We all love to see the butterflies flittering around. There's nothing that makes my heart jump more than walking out through the Greg's Mist flower and just clouds of butterflies pop up. That makes me happy, all right? But the reality of it is you got to have the caterpillars first. And that means that you're going to have some chewed on plants. And that's just, again, part of the butterfly experience. So you can't have butterflies without caterpillars. Host plants attract the butterflies to your garden and keeps them coming back. Many butterflies have a sense of where they originated from, even generations down the road. There's a scientific term for it, which I can never remember, but basically it has to do with some kind of genetic connection with where they were born. So their offspring are likely to come back to your garden. Not all butterflies do this, but many do. Gulf fritillaries do, and monarchs do. Sometimes I have swallowtails seem to come back to the same places, even though I've moved the plants that they used as host plants. They'll eventually find them, but it seems like sometimes they'll come back to the very same spot in the garden as if they're looking for what I had there before. So watching butterflies leaving their cocoons can be lots of fun. Last summer, I had a bumper crop of Gulf fritillaries. There were so many caterpillars and so many chrysalis, they were everywhere. They were on the back of my lawn chairs. They were on the handle of my wheelbarrow. They were actually on other plants. Everywhere I looked. And my grandson got out there and he started counting chrysalis. Man, he had the best time finding all of those chrysalises hanging all over in little spots all over the place. He's my caterpillar wrangler. He'll come in and he'll tell me how many caterpillars there are on a particular plant. He loves to figure all that stuff out. Now, he's 9, fixing to turn 9, and I don't know how much longer he'll enjoy being in the garden with me, but right now we're having a lot of fun with it. So some typical host plants that you can have in your yard that will bring butterflies in. I picked these because I think you get the most bang for your buck. One, they're good here, and two, they're pretty easy to find for the most part. So dill will bring in black and tiger swallowtails. Dill is anything in that carrot family, dill, fennel, whatever. Now some people say, but I want my dill, I'm going to use it for cooking. That's fine. Plant a couple plants for the caterpillars and the rest for you, and then as you see them getting on the dill, your dill, you can move them to the other one. I just snip off a little piece and put it over there on the other, and they get over there on their dill and not on mine. Milkweed is good for monarchs, queens, and soldiers. We don't have soldiers here much, but we do have a lot of queens, and they look a lot like the monarchs, except they're slightly smaller and they don't have as much black veining on them, but they're very similar. They're all related. Passion vine is going to give you Gulf fritillaries and will also give you variegated fritillaries. If you lived further south, you could also get zebra longwings. We don't have them this far north, but for folks who live, down Austin, south of there, they get them. Hollyhocks are painted ladies. Snapdragons will give you buckeyes. Also, Ruellia is another one that buckeyes feed on. Sunflowers are border patch, silver checker spot, and dainty sulfurs. Sunflowers are a great all-around flower for butterfly gardens and also for hummingbird gardens, and we'll talk about why that is later. But even the wild sunflowers are fine. I just grow them in the alley because they get a little crazy in your yard. And I have found that when I plant sunflowers, nothing comes up. However, when the birds plant them, I get bumper crops. So I usually take some bird seed and just throw it over the fence and kind of let it grow. Trees are also host plants. Oaks will give you various dusky wings, which are usually gray or black or deep brown colors. Also hair streaks, which are gray, but they usually have some blue on them. Willows will give you viceroy, western tiger swallowtail, morning cloak, and red spotted purple. Red spotted purple is a really pretty one, and I've only had one in my garden. I don't have any willow close. Hackberries, hackberry and elm, both, they're in the same family, will give you question mark, hackberry and tawny emperors. And I read an interesting thing. If you don't have room for hackberry, and hackberry is a big tree, or you don't have a room for an elm, also a big tree. If you find one coming up in your yard, leave it. Let them eat the leaves off them. The caterpillars will eat the leaves off of them. And then in the fall, cut it to the ground. That'll keep it from getting big. You'll have a little shrubby bush in the flower garden. It comes back every spring for probably about 5 years or so. And the butterflies like those fresh green leaves on them. But you don't have to deal with that big old tree, because hackberries not only are big, but they're a little messy with the whole berry thing. I have a tree that we actually ended up cutting down and had some wind damage, was an elm. And I have little elms popping up in my garden all the time. And so I pick 2 or 3 or 4, and I just let them go ahead and get up. And they'll get about that big. And yeah, they look kind of scraggly, but I ignore that. And then in the fall, cut them off to the ground. Next spring, they'll come back out. When they die, well, that's okay. There's some coming up somewhere else, because they seem to be everywhere. Honey mesquite will give you the Cyrunus, which is a blue, recrets, and marine blues. They all are blues. Also, mistletoe. There's a really pretty butterfly, and I can't remember what it's called, that eat mistletoe. So if you got mistletoe, it's not always a bad deal. There's apparently an upside to it. Okay, so for an extensive list of host plants and the butterflies who love to eat them, you can check the DallasButterflies.com. They really kind of center on butterflies in their area, but there's a lot of overlap with us, because they're looking at the whole Metroplex area. So that, includes Weatherford, which is a little bit more like us. Okay, so nectar plants. Butterflies like flowers that have a surface that they can land on. They like daisies and coneflowers and sunflowers, because they have a nice big landing pad there. Compound or composite flowers like the sunflower here, they actually provide lots and lots of nectar, because the reality of it is all these little things in here are separate flowers. These are just rays that come off of it that say, hey, butterflies, here we are. And they get, sorry, I told you I was going to mess this thing up. There it goes. Okay. They get the nectar from in here. So each one of those little flowers has a part of them that produces nectar, so they get more bang for their buck. Butterflies prefer purple, pink, yellow, and white, though they do seem to have some individual preferences. I'll be real honest with you. I think if they have a lot of nectar, if they get on a plant that has nectar, they're going to stay on it for a while. I have red pentas. They come to the red pentas every year. They do like my coneflowers. Yellow is a big one for all insects. It's a color that they can see quite readily, and so it draws them in. So whether you're talking about coreopsis or cutleaf daisy, anything along those lines that's a yellow flower is going to be a good one. They're actually attracted more to smell than to color. Okay, so anything that has a good strong smell to it will be helpful as well. Plant in groups so you get clumps of color, because they're flying. Some of them are flying pretty high. So if you have 3 or 4 or 5 plants all the same color in one area, it's going to give you a big chunk of color that they can see. Same thing works with hummingbirds. Shoot for a long bloom period as possible. What you want to do is provide them with food as long through the season as you possibly can. So you want to try to have some things that will give them nectar in the springtime. Here I've got some pincushion flower, pincushion flower, larkspur. I get swallowtails on a larkspur a lot. Coreopsis blooms pretty well in the spring. Redbud trees will bloom in the spring. And then in summer, you can't beat lantana. It provides a lot of nectar, and man, it just takes that sun and keeps on going. And in the fall, asters are good. Another one for summer, Russian sage, which is not a native, but it does provide a lot of nectar for bees and smaller butterflies. In the fall, asters are a good one. Liatris, which is also known as gay feather, it's a Texas native. It's kind of a big spike of purple flowers. Salvias, any salvias, whether you're talking about Gregi, which is the one we're most used to, autumn sage, or meadow sages, which are European, but they provide lots of nectar. So they work. Okay. Oh, went the wrong way. Okay, so some perennials that you can plant that will bring in the butterflies. Lantana I mentioned already. It's a really good one, and I've seen hummingbirds on it as well. Greg's Mist Flower is this little one right here. It's in the Ageritum family. I call it butterfly crack. They love it. They will. We were at the Master Gardener plant sale one year, and we had pots of it, and we were bringing it into the building, and the butterflies were literally following us into the building. It does pretty well in shade. It'll take part shade, and I've actually saw it at a gas station in Gulfweight in full sun, covered in butterflies. For some reason, they took it out. I don't know why, but it was beautiful. Yarrow is another good one. Yarrow is a good spring and fall. In the summertime, it gets a little ratty looking, and I cut it back. But in the spring and fall, it's really nice. Coreopsis is a good native. There's some hybrids of it, but I go with the good old lance leaf Coreopsis. It blooms, it reseeds. If I don't like it, I pull it up, give it to other people. But it's a good one. And if you cut it off after its spring bloom, it'll bloom again in the fall. Now, mine's kind of bloomed out with all this heat. I think it said, no, I'll be back in the fall, guys. But normally I have it blooming late into June. Blackfoot daisy is a nice one. It's this little one right here. The flowers on it are really small, but the plant will have a lot. Now, this is a Texas native. It's a wildflower. You can buy it. I see it at Lowe's sometimes. We have it sometimes at the Master Gardener plant sale. The only thing that I have ever done to kill a Blackfoot daisy is water it too much. So if you've got a spot in your garden that's kind of out away, doesn't always get hit by the sprinkler, or it's a place you don't water very often, Blackfoot daisy is really good. I tend to use it along the outside borders of my flower bed. I live on a corner lot. I have flower beds along the street. So I put them out there on that edge. They will reseed. They're short-lived, especially in a garden situation, because I think we just give them too much love. They can't handle it. But they'll reseed. They'll come back. And they're usually not expensive to buy. I usually get 3 or 4 each season and just put them back out again, because the little butterflies really love them. And they smell like honey, so they're really nice. Scabiosa, I mentioned before, which is the pincushion flower. Coneflowers, y'all are probably familiar with. Meadow sage is related to the Salvia Gregi. It's in that big salvia family that has like 10,000 plants. And it tends to stay smaller, and it'll put up a little spike, usually of blue or pink. And small butterflies and bees will just get all along that little spike of flowers. And it does real well. It'll bloom in the spring. I've had it bloom pretty darn early in the spring. I mean, when it's still nothing else, even my tulips haven't come up, and my daffodils, it'll sometimes send up a spike if we've had a couple of warm days. Lavender, I love it. I kill it, but I love it. It's another one that the butterflies like. Hollyhocks are good, and then Liatris I mentioned before, which is a Texas native. So good annuals for butterflies. Zinnias are great. Pentas, I always plant pentas because the monarchs really seem to like them. Most of the milkweed we have around here that you're going to buy in a nursery is going to be tropical milkweed, and it's treated as an annual. If you're lucky enough that you've been able to grow native milkweed in your yard, that's great. I've put out seed, and I have no luck. Apparently, milkweed only grows where you don't want it to grow, because I've never been able to get it to grow in my garden, except for the tropical. Golden dew plant, which is, I don't know, it's this one right here. It's also called skyflower. It's native to further south, and it can't handle our cold, but it makes a nice little shrub, and it has these beautiful little purple flowers with a white edge around them. I like mine so much I put it in a really big pot and put it in the greenhouse in the wintertime. So far it's done pretty well till the hot winds hit it, and then all the flowers went. But I'm hoping with a little love and maybe some shade, I can find a place where it'll keep on blooming. Cosmos is another good one. sunflowers, of course, and then petunias. And petunias are also liked by hummingbirds as well. Okay, so some different trees and shrubs that you can use to bring in butterflies. Desert willow, sorry, I keep hitting the wrong button. Desert willow is this one down here. I found that it's also pretty good for hummingbirds. Mountain laurel, Yopon holly. Believe it or not, Yopon doesn't have big flowers on it. It has little teeny tiny flowers, but it has really pretty red berries. But I have a lot of butterflies that seem to really like to hang out in that Yopon. I'm assuming that they're feeding on the flowers. I don't know. Maybe they just like Yopons. But they seem to hang out there a lot. Red admirals, some of the like question mark and some of those kinds of things. Vitex is a great one. It's not a Texas native, but it's one that gives you so much flower in the heat of summer. And it's another one hummingbirds and butterflies both like, especially swallowtails. I always see swallowtails on the Vitex. And then a good old Texas sage. I mean, you can't beat that. Some shrubs, butterfly bush. Now, butterfly bush in our area, I don't consider it invasive. If you go to East Texas or Central Texas, it's considered invasive. We're a little too dry here. I can't get one to live in my flower bed more than about 5 years. Some people say that they can't get them to live more than a year or two. They do provide a lot of nectar, but I like them. I usually plant one, and then when it dies, I plant another one. It's just kind of one of those things. I don't expect it to live a long time, but it does provide a lot of nectar. Turk's cap is a great one. It's one of the few things that'll grow and bloom in pretty deep shade here in Texas. And it's another one that's loved dearly by hummingbirds as well as butterflies. Glossy obelia is another good one. Good old-fashioned shrub that everybody's grandma had. It's a good one. Salvia gregi, and then agurita if you're willing to put up with the pointy leaves and spines and stuff.
What is the yellow down at the bottom?
That's the agurita.
That is the agurita.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I've seen much of that.
Yeah, it's out. You'll find it along the fence rows, along the barbed wire fences, and in the fall it has red berries on it.
Oh.
And it's kind of like a Texas version of holly because the leaves are pointy and
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
not real pleasant. Now, if you have a window you don't want anyone crawling through, you can plant it under there. That'll keep them out. Okay, so the last thing is you need to have a friendly environment. It's important to make our gardens both inviting and a safe place for butterflies, and the best way to do that is avoid chemicals whenever possible, okay? Let's see. So, here's the thing about pesticides. They kill everything. If someone comes and says, hey, I can spray your yard and I will get rid of the mosquitoes and only the mosquitoes and everything else will be all right, they are not being truthful with you, okay? And people do it all the time. I have a friend who's in the bug business, or he's retired now, and I asked him, I said, flat out, tell me, you know I butterfly garden. Is there anything you can spray that's not going to kill my butterflies? He said, no. He said, it just doesn't work. He said, I had a lady who, for her wedding, wanted to spray and get rid of all the mosquitoes, but still had the butterflies. And I told her it's just not possible. Okay? So we have to be really careful with those insecticides. Now, I'm not going to say don't ever use an insecticide, because I have mealybugs on some of my succulents, and we're fixing to go with the nuclear option, because I've been treating them with every kind of organic treatment I've been able to find on the internet, and I just can't get rid of them. Spider mites are the same way. Sometimes with spider mites, you just got to go nuts. Yes, ma'am.
Question. On the one, they have a pesticide that you put, like if you have standing water,
Mm-hmm.
that will kill
The larva. Mm-hmm.
Does that affect?
That doesn't seem to affect butterflies. For one thing, they're not going
I
to...
didn't think it would. But
Yeah. They're probably not going to get into anything very deep if they can avoid it. Sometimes they don't recognize it. But they're probably going to stay away from any kind of water that's very deep. And I use those little crystals or the dunks
Yeah.
everywhere because I can't seem to control the mosquitoes in my yard. So I've got rain barrels. It's got dunks in them. I've got anything that's got water or might possibly have water at some point has the crystals. I say crystals, they're the bits. They look kind of crystally to me, I guess. So systemics are particularly bad for caterpillars. So if you're going to use something, you might try something that's going to become inert pretty quickly as opposed to getting into the plant. If you have a plant that you're pretty sure you've looked it up online and it doesn't have any caterpillars that feed on it, or at least no caterpillars in our area that feed on it, and you need to use a systemic to get rid of mealybugs or to get rid of spider bites, I think that's okay. I mean, sometimes you just have to do that, but you kind of have to weigh your options and see kind of what's working for you. I have a Texas mountain laurel, and there's a little worm that gets on them. I'm assuming it's a caterpillar, but it eats all the buds out of it, and I really would like some of the flowers in the springtime. And so I use BT, but I use it only on that plant, and I only use it on a still day, which is hard to find in springtime in Texas. Okay, but sometimes I do it late in the evening, and it smells horrible, but it gets rid of those worms and hopefully doesn't get on anything else. The other thing is that mountain laurel is not really close to anything that I normally have a lot of butterflies on. So if you absolutely have to use them, just do them sparingly and carefully. And the reality of it is, you should always use them sparingly and carefully. There's a lot of stuff out there it's dangerous to us too. So you should really be careful about not overspraying and getting it on yourself and things along those lines. One of the things that I do put up with is a lot of aphids. Aphids are kind of a pain, and I try to take them off with a water hose or sometimes soapy water and that kind of stuff. But you're going to have some chewed up leaves, and that's just kind of the way it is. I mean, the caterpillars are going to chew them up anyway, so I just try to keep the aphids under control, especially on milkweed. But if you have aphids on your milkweed, it'll tell you it doesn't have systemics in it, because sometimes they'll come from the grower with systemics. And I've been trying to find someone who can tell me how long those systemics stay in the plant. No one really has an answer for that. I'm figuring at least a year, but could be longer than that. Okay, so an issue with ants. How many of you have fire ants? Everybody has fire ants. There are 7 different kinds of ants in the state of Texas, and I have 5 in my yard. I'm so excited. The only ants that I actually am cool with are the red harvester ants, because one day I hope that I will have a horny toad in my yard. When I was a little kid, we had them all the time, but now I don't see them. It's very rare for me to see a horny toad, never in my yard. But fire ants, they're a menace to caterpillars as well as to us. They will eat and kill and eat caterpillars. So I've been told that anything that will kill ants will also kill caterpillars, but caterpillars shouldn't eat ant bait. I mean, it's just not something that they would be on or be around. It's not something that would attract them. So you kind of have to weigh your risk a little bit. If you've got ants that are close to a plant that you do have butterflies on, you might wait till later in the year when maybe you don't have a lot of butterflies on that plant and see if or maybe hit it really early in the year. But as far as I can tell, this is the one thing that I do use fairly regularly, and that's ant bait. By the way, ever had fire ants in a potted plant and you didn't know how to get them out? Okay, you take some borax and some powdered sugar, about 2/3 powdered sugar to 1/3 borax, mix it with enough water to make a little paste, put it in the lid of a jar and set it in that pot. And they'll be gone pretty quick. Borax, which is like 20 mule team borax like you get in the laundry section of the grocery store, about 1/3 to 2/3 cup powdered sugar. Mix it with just a little bit of water. Make a paste, put it in the lid of a jar, set it in the pot or next to it, because that sugar is going to attract them.
How much borax?
Oh, I usually do a little bit, so I'd say maybe a teaspoon of borax to 2 teaspoons powdered sugar. If you got several pots, you may want to make a bigger mix, and so you can put it in several lids and put it out. But I've found every time I've used it, it's gotten rid of them. They'll either leave and go somewhere else, which is fine with me, or it'll kill them. So it works pretty well. Okay. Let's see what else I got. Okay. Some other things that you can include in your butterfly garden that will make the butterflies happy is ornamental grasses. Mexican feathergrass is a good one. Muley, there's several different kinds of muley grass. Any of the kind of fine textured grasses, butterflies, particularly smaller butterflies, use them as cover. They'll seek shelter in there if something's coming around that they think is going to get them. And I think some of them also may be larval. I keep getting information that says there are larval plants for some butterflies, but I can't get anyone to narrow down which butterflies it is. Okay. But Mexican feathergrass is a Texas native. and so are the muleys. Okay, so leave the leaves on the ground. Leaves on the ground in the fall will provide cover for butterflies that winter over. If you've ever been out on a really pretty winter day when it was sunny and the temperature got up and you saw yellow butterflies, right? And you're like, where'd they come from? They're in your leaves. They'll hide underneath those leaves and they'll find them a cozy spot and they'll stay there. And then when they have a sunny day, they'll come out and see if maybe there's some dandelions blooming or something, and they'll look for nectar. So if you leave those leaves until mid-spring or early spring and things start really warming up, it's going to insulate your plants from cold. It's going to provide shelter for different kinds of insects, including butterflies, and you don't have to mess with it in the fall. Of course, I have a friend who swears up and down that nobody in Texas should ever rake their leaves. They're going to blow away anyway. I find that that's not always the case. They tend to blow into one corner, though, so that's pretty good. Yeah, or your gutters, exactly. So try to avoid watering with overhead sprinklers. It can dilute nectar, so try to keep it kind of low. If you have a sprinkler system, try to set it as low as possible. Drip irrigation, of course, is the best way to go. I don't have an irrigation system. My husband says he won't put one in until I quit digging up the yard. So I keep putting in more flower beds, and he won't put in a sprinkler system yet. But I do try to use soaker hoses, and I'll use sprinklers that keep the water low to the ground. That's the best way to go. And it'll save you money, too. So that works. So you can also create a puddling area. Take a shallow dish, put some sand in it, keep it kind of moist. Here you can see that there's some gravel and some big rocks for sunning, and then you have the sand here. There are a lot of important minerals that butterflies will get from that damp sand, particularly male butterflies. And occasionally you might see you've watered and you've got some bare ground and suddenly there's some butterflies on it. That's what they're doing. They're getting minerals from the soil. You can put out flat rocks for them to sun on or have logs for them to sun on. You do have to be a little bit careful. I had a little sunning dish like this on a rock underneath my pecan tree until I realized that my Texas spiny lizard was using it as a snack tray. So I had to move it up a little bit so he couldn't get to it because he really apparently thinks butterflies are delicious. So you can put it in a sunny area or area in this part of Texas with dappled sun and close to some place where there's a little bit of cover. Okay, so you can also create a butterfly feeder. And I've been really successful with this. Not all butterflies are interested in nectar. A lot of them like rotting fruit, tree sap, dung, and even carrion dead carcasses. The ones that I find, red admirals, painted ladies, question marks, goatweed leafwing, which I had one for the first time last fall. Those all prefer some kind of rotting fruit. Trying to think what else. Morning cloaks, I've been told, I've only had one morning cloak in my yard ever, and I haven't been able to lure one back yet. I need willows, that's what they like. I just don't have a spot for them. So the way that you can do this, you can either just put out some overripe fruit. Now don't do it close to the house. You're going to want to put it out a little ways and go check on it every once in a while. Or you can actually make them some butterfly food, and that's what I do. There we go. So you can mash up bananas or peaches, mix it with a little molasses or brown sugar, add stale beer, a little rum, or yeast. You want it to actually ferment. So put it in a plastic bottle. Oh, sorry.
So they're alcoholic.
Apparently so. Apparently so.
Well, do you get snails that way?
I haven't gotten any snails that way. I put it up in a dish that's up off the ground again because of my lizards. But I have not had it. But yeah, apparently snails like beer. So I don't know. You might get some.
It's easy.
Kill them. Yeah, as they get in, and they drown. So usually what I do, and this is not like science, okay? My mom really loves bananas, but we usually end up with a couple of them left over. I'll throw them in the freezer if they're overripe and I don't need them just yet. Take a couple of them, mash them up real good. Put a little sugar in there. My husband's drinking a beer. I go over, take it, and pour a little in there and give it back to him. It's whatever. Every once in a while, he'll try a new beer and he doesn't like it. And I'm like, yes, I've got beer for my butterflies. This next part is really important. Put it in a plastic bottle and seal, but not too tight. Okay, because that fermentation process is going to create gases. So I had one last fall. I had it in a little Gatorade bottle, and I didn't put the lid on very tight, and as it began to ferment, I could see I had put too much in there and it was coming out the edges. And so I thought, okay, I'm going to very slowly loosen this cap so that the gases can escape. Guess what happened? And I was covered with, overripe bananas, beer, and brown sugar. It was a mess. Apparently, I loosened it just enough that the gases shot the cap off. I'd never found the cap. I don't know where it went, but it was kind of a mess. So I don't leave the lid off the bottle, and the reason I don't leave the lid off, I did that once, and I ended up having butterflies getting down in the bottle and drowning. So you do need to cover it with something so that they can't get in there. But if the bottle is really full, I just set the cap on top, and if it starts to kind of ooze out over the top, leave it alone. The butterflies will get to it. It's fine. Unless you want to shower in mashed up bananas. Okay, so you can put a sponge in a shallow dish or a piece of bark. I usually will try to find a nice good piece of bark that's got some little crevices in it. Again, if you get too much in your plate, I use just a clay dish. They can get in there and drown. And after it rains, I have to go out and dump it because they'll get attracted to that water because it's got the stuff in it, but it'll be too deep. But you want it to be pretty shallow. I had a lady said she painted it on fence posts and trees. She just took a little paintbrush, just painted it, and the butterflies would come to the top of the fence post or come to the trees where she put it. I haven't tried that yet. I have sometimes put it on the sidewalk when I had a lot. This is a morning cloak. I mentioned it before. They're a big butterfly. They're about like that. This is the only one I've ever had in my yard. It was on the mailbox, and I took a picture of it. And I keep hoping I'll put out the brew and then we'll come back, but I haven't so far. Okay, so some helpful websites for anything about butterflies. Butterfliesandmoths.org. This is probably the best one to go to. This is a national site. And so it'll give you have to go to your state and it'll give you information. Or if you just want in general, like I was visiting Colorado last summer with my grandson and we went hiking and he wanted to know about butterflies. This is a great place to go because it gave me stuff for outside the state of Texas. Butterflies at Home has some suggestions on books and links to butterfly and nature centers. DallasButterflies.com I already mentioned is a good one. Let's see what I've got next. Oh, conservation sites. Xerxes is insect conservation, especially pollinators. They have lots of information on monarchs. There's one called Monarch Watch. It's like the site for anything on monarchs. It tells you how to put in a monarch way station. They're the ones that are working to get cities to declare themselves monarch cities. San Antonio's done it and some others. And basically, certain percentage of the businesses have to put in butterfly gardens on their property. And then the National Butterfly Center, which is in Mission, Texas, has a butterfly garden certification program. That's what I told you about before. You fill out their little form, you pay your fee, and I think you're certified for 4 years, and they send you you have to pay for a sign, but if you go to all that trouble, you might as well get the sign. A lot of people don't realize that Texas has more butterflies than all other 50 states combined. And that's because of that area down in South Texas, which becomes subtropical. We get stuff coming up from Mexico and Central America, and in the fall we get a lot of stuff coming from the north down. They have a big butterfly festival there every year. It's I think in November. They say it's the best time to come. But Mission is a long way from anything. But I've been really wanting to go and see their stuff. They've got a lot of really cool things there. Okay, any questions on butterflies before I switch over to hummingbirds? All right. So there's a lot of overlap with hummingbirds and butterflies, which works great for me. I generally garden for wildlife overall. So birds, hummingbirds, as I mentioned, my lizards. Okay, so the pictures in the Hummingbird slideshow, very few of them are mine. There's a handful that are, mainly because they are not as polite as the butterflies to sit patiently while I take their picture. They just don't, and I have a couple of different cameras that I try to use. I'm not a photographer. My brother's a photographer. I'm not. I'm too impatient, and so I don't usually get very many good pictures. But okay, so real quick, hummingbirds in our area. These are the most likely ones you will see in the Abilene area. 90% of the time you see a hummingbird, it's going to be a black chin. And he's going to look like he has a little black head, but if you can see, there's a little purple band underneath there. This is the male. Here's the female. In the fall and in the spring, you may see some ruby throats coming through. They're usually a little further east in the Dallas area, and then you'll see them kind of swing west as they get further south. So Austin will get them and so on and so forth. And then the rufous. And you'll know a rufous because it looks like a copper penny shining through flying through the air. It's just really bright copper color. They come out of New Mexico, and you'll see them in far west Texas. I've had one in my yard one year. It was like, oh, it's a rufous. And my husband's like, oh my goodness, I can't believe it. We've seen a rufous. Yeah. But I understand people in the country see them all the time. I'm in town, and so there's a lot of places for them to find flowers and feeders and things along those lines. So they don't necessarily come to my joint first. Now, there are other hummingbirds in Texas. There's about 12 that have been sighted in Texas fairly regularly, but most of them are in far west Texas or along the Gulf Coast. Now, last year I had one that I think was a broad-billed hummingbird. I couldn't get a picture of it. It sat for the longest time and let me look at it, and then as soon as I snuck in the house to get a camera, it took off. But looking at pictures, I'm pretty sure that's what it was, and they're not that common in our area. They're usually much further east or west or much further south. If you get into the eastern part of the United States, the ruby throat's the only thing you'll find. They're the only one that's east of the Mississippi. That's starting to change. We're seeing more rufous that are wintering over in the deep south and in Florida. They're changing their habitats a little bit. Okay, so one of the things that people don't realize is that hummingbirds are insectivores. That is where they get the vast majority of their food, is from soft-sided insects. And a lot of people have never seen a hummingbird with his mouth open like that, but he's fixing to get that gnat. So many of the plants that attract butterflies will attract the small insects that hummingbirds like. That's what they're going to feed their babies, and that's what's going to provide them with the protein that they need. Okay. Limiting insecticides are going to help your hummers get that protein and feed their babies. Nectar provides hummers with the calories they need to keep going. And in the fall, when they get ready to make that long migration, they're going to be packing on the ounces, okay? They're looking to put on weight so that they can make that long, long journey. And that's when you're most likely to see them at your hummingbird feeders. At least it is for me. I'll see them a little bit in the spring. I'll see them kind of off and on through the summer. And I think that's mostly because the males are breeding and the females are taking care of nests. And they're mainly hunting for insects at that point. And then in the fall, when they're getting to power up, that's when they start hitting the feeders really hard, at least for me. Okay, so here's some important rules about feeders. All right, and I may sound a little harsh here, but trust me, there's a reason for it. Okay, so the main thing is you have to change your feeders. I know people that put sugar water in their feeder and leave it there all summer. That is not good. Okay, for one thing, after a while, they're not going to come to it because they realize it's bad. Sugar water ferments pretty quickly. The higher the temperature, the faster it ferments. So when we have 100-degree days, you should be changing it every day. And that's a pain, especially if you have a lot of feeders. Okay? One of the things that I do when I have my feeders out, I don't put very much in them. Less than half. Until fall, when it cools off a little bit and I'm seeing lots and lots of hummingbirds. Okay? But they're going to tell you, if you look up on most sites, at least change it every 3 to 4 days, even if the temperatures are in the 60s and 70s. They need to be changed a lot. And one of the things that I did last summer, because I had a whole bunch of stuff going on, I decided not to put out any feeders till the fall. I had lots of plants that they could find nectar on, and I just felt like because I was so busy, I wasn't going to have time to take care of those feeders like I needed to, and it was just better not to put the feeders out at all until fall came along, things cooled off, and I didn't have to worry about changing those feeders quite so often, and I had a little more time. So another thing about feeders, no honey, artificial sweeteners, dyes, sugar, water, that's it. Now, I have all the time, will food coloring hurt them? No, not really. Most of the food coloring is plant-based, but you don't need it. I have a friend who runs a little bed and breakfast, and I'm going to talk about it here in a little bit. And she has lots and lots and lots of hummingbirds, and she puts out lots of feeders. She puts about 2 drops of red food coloring per gallon of nectar. And that's so she can see from across the way whether that feeder still got nectar in it. She says it's just so I can see that line, because if it's clear, I can't see, and I have to go all the way over there. She says I have so many to check. Another place I heard a guy talk, they have a lot of feeders on their property. They use different colored drops each day, so they know how long that nectar's been in the feeder. So he'll put a little bit of green in one on Monday, and then blue on Tuesday, and so on and so forth. And he said, it's just to help me remember when I have so many feeders, when they went out, and so I can change them regularly. He says, but I don't use very much. Just a little bit is really all it takes. So don't worry about putting the food coloring in to attract them. That's it. You don't really need it. If you've got a lot of feeders out and you're looking over a long distance to see, yeah, you can put a little bit in there, and it's not going to hurt them. But no artificial sweeteners and no honey. Honey sometimes has bacteria in it that is dangerous for hummingbirds. If you find mold in your feeder, you need to wash it with bleach and water. If you're changing your hummingbird feeders regularly, just rinsing them really good with hot water should be fine. This friend of mine who runs a bed and breakfast, they hose them down outside. They just let the hose sit in the sun for a while and hose them down real quick, and then they put food back in them and they go back up. But if you left it a little bit longer, or maybe it was a little hotter than you thought it was, and you've got some mold, you need to hit it with some bleach. And usually that's about 1 part bleach to 9 or 10 parts water. So it doesn't have to be a real strong bleach solution. You just want to make sure that you rinse it really, really, really well. And usually after I rinse it, I let it sit for a while before I put nectar in it, and then I smell of it to see if it still smells like bleach, and if it does, I rinse it again. Place feeders less than 5 feet or more than 15 feet from windows. Hummingbirds are little, they are feisty, they will fight over hummingbird feeders, they will fuss, and they don't always look where they're going. And windows are not good for them. And they will hit them and hit them hard. Windows kill more birds every year than you would imagine. It's in the millions. They just don't see glass. A lot of people think it's the skyscrapers that get them. They don't fly. Most birds don't fly that high. It's actually homes and businesses where they end up hitting stuff. So if you get it at least 5 feet, within 5 feet of that window, they can probably see the glass, or you can put something on it. Or if you're like my house, the windows are dirty enough, they're going to see that there's something there. My windows are never clean. More than 15 feet, they're probably not going to get that close to the window. Even if they're fussing with each other and, that kind of stuff, they'll stay away. They'll be far enough away, they're okay. You can buy some stickers now that you can put on them. You can buy them on eBay that don't really show up to us, but they have a covering on them that birds can see, and you can put them on your windows. If you've got a clear storm door and you ever leave your wooden door open, it would be a good idea to put them, because they don't see those clear storm doors. Okay, so ratio 4 to 1, 4 parts water to 1 part sugar. Now, when they get to migrating in the fall, I up that to 3 to 1. And I do that because I met a guy he bird bands hummingbirds. His name is Mr. Floyd, and he recommended that because they need those calories. So in the fall, I'll up it to 3 to 1. No more than that. That's the max that they really need. They're not going to keep coming back if it's higher than that. Also, if you get higher than 3 to 1, you're going to have more bees than hummingbirds. And one of the things people talk about all the time is bees, running off the hummingbirds. And what you can do is you can drop down your sugar solution a little bit. You can go as low as 5-to-1, and the hummingbirds will still come, but the bees like those higher concentrations. Or you can just put a feeder out for them further away and put a higher concentration in it.
Do you know when they stop breeding?
In Texas, they actually will lay 2 clutches of eggs in our part of Texas. So they come in around March. Males will hit first, and then the females will be in probably in April, and they immediately start making nests, and they'll start mating and laying eggs. Now, the males don't help take care of the babies. Only the female does. And she'll make a nest that's about this big around, and she'll lay 2 eggs. They're about the size of a Tic Tac, each one of them.
And they do nest in bushes as well as trees?
Usually in this part of Texas, they like oak trees and pecan trees, and they'll be probably 20 feet off the ground. Now, if you go into California and Arizona, where they have it's a lot more deserty, they will actually make nests a little bit lower down. You've probably seen on YouTube, they sometimes will make their nest on a clothesline or something really odd. We don't see that much with the black chins, but apparently some of the ones you see in California do that a little more commonly. The rufous have been known they like their nest underneath a hawk's nest. Because a hummingbird's not enough for a hawk to mess with. It's just not enough calories to expend his energy, but it'll keep the other birds away. And so they figured that out. Okay, so you really don't need a feeder to attract hummingbirds. I was putting a feeder out for many, many, many years and never got one. I probably got some hummingbirds, I just never saw them. But it's really the plants that are going to draw them in, because that's where the big color is and that's what they see. So there's lots of plants that can do that job. So whether you want to fill a garden or just some flower pots, there are plenty of choices. I have a daughter-in-law who lives in Denton. About 3 years ago, they were living in an apartment, and she had a little garden on her balcony. And she had hummingbirds come into her feeder, but she had flowers there with lots of color that would pull them in. So you don't have to have a huge garden. You can have a patio garden. You can have something small. It's all about that intensity of color.
They love hibiscus.
They do love hibiscus.
I have potted hibiscus.
Yeah, and that will definitely bring them in. They like that. Okay, so some nectar plants for hummingbirds. Flamicanthus. When I could not get hummingbirds to come to my yard, I went to a neighbor's garage sale. And she had them all over the place. They were just flitting around, and we were ducking. They were flying around. I said, okay, what's the secret? She goes, do you have a flamicanthus? I said, what's a flamicanthus? She said, get you a flamicanthus, and you will have hummingbirds. And you know what? She was right. I don't know if they keep coming back for the flamicanthus, but it was big enough and bright enough to attract. So flamicanthus has a little trumpet-shaped orange flower about like that. They die back in the winter, but they'll get pretty good size in the summertime. They used to call them propane plants because farmers would plant them in front of their propane tanks. So in the summertime, they grow up and hide the propane tank. You wouldn't see it. But they love those things. That's probably my #1 plant to have. And when I read Birds and Blooms and all these other places that are telling you what will attract hummingbirds, they never have flamicanthus. I'm assuming it does not grow well in the north. And that's where a lot of the writers on those sites are from. Salvia gregae. And most salvias, really. They love it. The meadow sages are small enough. I've never seen one on them. I've seen butterflies and bees. But some of the hybrids like black and blue salvia, Silky's Dream, any of the gregaes, I'm trying to think what else. Oh, Galena is another one. It's a hybrid. They love them. They're going to be all over them. Turk's cap. It's another one that often gets missed, and it's a great one if you've got some shade or you've got a place that doesn't get sun all day. East side of the house will work, even the north side of the house. It'll bloom better if it has a little bit more sun, but it doesn't want too much. But they love it. And if I get a picture, it's probably going to be on the Turk's cap. Cannas. They love cannas. Canna lilies. Coral honeysuckle, which is a native Texas honeysuckle. It has an orange bloom to it, and it usually blooms pretty early in the spring. Don't worry, it's not one of those crazy honeysuckles that takes over your yard. It's pretty well behaved. Lantana. They like lantana. It's a little low sometimes for them, but if they've been chased off the other stuff, they'll definitely go to it. Desert willow. Larkspur. I had them on my larkspur in the spring one year. Nicotiana or Nicotana, I don't know how it's pronounced. It's flowering tobacco. It's the I don't know, the colorful version of tobacco, and it stays small, and you can put it in a potted plant. It works really well. Hibiscus, both the tropical and the native hibiscus will work. Petunias and the little, they call it million bells, colubriaceae. I'm not very good at Latin. They like those too. I think they're related to petunias. And red yucca. When I was putting this list together, I'd put some stuff down, and it seemed like every time I walked away to do something, I would think of another flower, and I had to come back and add it to it. There are a lot that they like, but my top 3 that I've listed here, those are the ones that will really bring them in. If you're just going to plant 3 things, if you have limited space, I'd plant those. If you're looking for perennials. If you have limited space and you don't have a place for a big flower bed, because those plants all get pretty good size, then I would go with, what did I do? Pushing the wrong thing the wrong way. I would go with petunias, hibiscus, nicotiana. Those you could put in a pot or a handful of pots. Pentas are another one. I've seen them on pentas, the red ones. And red is the color they like. Okay, so hummers are more about sight than smell. I had a guy jokingly tell me, yeah, paint a big red cross on top of your house. They'll see the red and they'll come looking around. I think he was joking. But they do definitely, they're visual. They're attracted to reds, oranges, and pinks. Now that doesn't mean they won't get on flowers of other colors, but that's what's going to bring them in. Because I've seen them on the black and blue salvia, which is this one right here. And I've seen them on larkspur. This is that flowering tobacco right here. Think bell or trumpet-shaped flowers. They like to be able to stick their beak down in there, and then they can stick their tongue down in there and get what they need. So this is the flowering tobacco. This is desert willow. This is flame acanthus right here. This is salvia greggii, and it comes in just about every color these days, and I've not seen a color they don't like. Now they do tend to go to the reds, the pinks, and the purples first, but I've seen them on the blues and even on my yellow one. As I mentioned before, that's black and blue salvia, lantana, hibiscus, and Turk's cap. Okay, provide water. Moving water attracts birds. Hummers are no exception. Hummers don't drink a lot of water, but what they do need is they need to be able to wash nectar off of them. Their wings will get sticky, and so they need that water. Bubblers, fountains, shallow bird baths provide water for bathing. So anything that bubbles over a flat surface, this is a really good example. It's just a rock. They've drilled a hole in it, put a bubbler inside of it. And so the water is very, very shallow, and they're not going to be afraid to get into that. Fountains that have big drops, but it's not real fast. It's not like shooting out a whole stream, but it's shooting out just drops. They like that. You can see him here. And then really shallow bird baths. This is actually a bird bath with some water running down the side, and he's perched on the side there. Misters that spray on nearby bushes work well too. This friend of mine that has the bed and breakfast that I was talking about earlier, they actually have misters on a timer. They come on about 7 o'clock in the morning, and then they come on again at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And the hummingbirds know that that's bath time. And so they'll just come in by the dozens. And he's got stock panels that he takes a section of it and bends it over to make kind of an arch. And they'll get in there and they'll bathe themselves, and then they'll get over on the dry areas and preen themselves and fluff their feathers up and get all dried out. So water is a really good one, and it's going to bring birds in general. You don't have to have a lot of moving water. A drip a dripper will work. You can take, best way to do a dripper. A lot of people will take a bucket or a jug. They'll drill a hole in the bottom and put one of those drip emitters on them. And then they just let it drip down into a saucer or something. And it's that movement of water that catches their attention. Does not have to be a whole lot. Okay, so if you want to take a hummingbird field trip, this is the bed and breakfast I was talking about. You can visit the Hummer House. It's in Cristobal, which is about 12 miles south of San Angelo. Now, you can, of course, they'd love you to stay at their bed and breakfast. They have 3 cabins, and it's very nice. But you can also go to their viewing center. All right, it's home to the largest concentration of breeding black-chin hummingbirds in the country. Also, the largest concentration of breeded painting buntings in the country. If you don't know what a painting bunting is, look it up. They're really cool looking. Looks like a 3rd grader decided to paint a bird with every color in the crayon box. So day visitors are welcome to visit the observation room on Saturdays from 9 to 1 from April through June. They have a great big room with windows on one side and hummingbird feeders. They've got a little water feature out there for the other birds, and you can see tons of birds, lots and lots of hummingbirds. They've got so many feeders. We've got about 8 feeders there, and every port will have a bird on it, especially in the summertime. If you want to take a group there, for $5 a person, they will do a little program for you and tell you all about the hummingbirds there and hummingbirds in general. They're a really nice couple, really fun folks. But I've been trying to get some folks in my church to go do a trip there for a thing. I haven't talked them into it. They also do bird bandings there. They've got some folks who come over from Angela State, some from somewhere in the Northeast, and band all different kinds of birds, including hummingbirds. And if you can find out when they're doing it, you have to kind of call and say, hey, do you have a bird banding coming up? You can go and watch. And sometimes they'll actually let you release the birds, which is pretty cool. If you've never heard a hummingbird's heart, I've had them hold a hummingbird up to my ear, and it's like, it's that fast. It's really cool. It's lots of fun. I took my grandson. It was a blast. So, yeah, you just call and check with them. They're online, and you can get all the information you need. Okay.
Thank you for the presentation.
Oh, thank y'all. I enjoyed it.